The crystal glasses clinked against marble tabletops as Julia nervously adjusted her black apron, eyes scanning the private dining room of Tesoro Nascosto, where Chicago's most feared men gathered weekly. Her heart raced each time she approached their table, particularly when she had to serve the young boss seated at the head. Dario Cortese commanded respect despite his age, his tailored suit contrasting sharply with the ruthlessness in his dark eyes whenever he glanced her way. Tonight, however, something different flickered across his face when she arrived with their wine selection, a fleeting curiosity that made her pulse quicken. Il vino è eccezionale, perfetto con la pasta, one of the older men commented, his Italian accent noticeably American. The others nodded appreciatively, deferring to his apparent expertise with practiced submission that revealed the strict hierarchy at the table. Julia couldn't stop herself, the words slipping out before she could catch them. È eccellente, non eccezionale, she corrected softly, the proper pronunciation flowing naturally from her tongue as she poured the ruby liquid into Dario's glass, immediately regretting her impulsiveness as the atmosphere shifted. The table fell deadly silent, all eyes locking onto her with expressions ranging from shock to barely contained rage. The older man's face darkened with humiliation, his knuckles whitening around his fork as he prepared to respond to this unexpected challenge from a mere waitress. "Who taught you to speak?" he growled, half rising from his chair before Dario raised one hand, stopping him instantly. The younger man's expression remained unreadable as he studied Julia with newfound interest, as though seeing something valuable hidden in plain sight. Her hands trembled slightly as she finished serving, acutely aware of how catastrophically she had overstepped. Years of hiding her linguistic talents shattered in a moment of carelessness that might cost her everything, especially in a restaurant known for catering to powerful clients. Dario took a slow sip, eyes never leaving hers as the wine touched his lips. When he finally spoke, his voice was velvet and steel combined. "Your manager mentioned an American waitress. He failed to mention your other qualities that clearly deserve more attention." "My apologies, sir," Julia whispered, desperate to undo her mistake. "I meant no disrespect. I simply—" She stopped as Dario raised a single finger to silence her, the gesture more effective than any shout could ever be in commanding absolute obedience. "Where did you learn to speak Italian so fluently?" he asked, his question carrying the weight of command rather than curiosity. The other men watched with predatory interest, sensing something unfolding before them that might provide evening entertainment. "My grandmother," she answered truthfully, fighting the urge to run. "She was from Florence and insisted I learn properly." Julia backed away slowly, hoping this small confession would satisfy him enough to let her escape the dangerous attention she'd drawn. As she turned to leave, his voice halted her again. "Stay behind after we finish," Dario instructed casually, as though discussing the weather. "I'd like to continue our conversation about your linguistic talents." His tone left no room for refusal, sending chills down her spine. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of anxiety as Julia served the remaining courses, each returned to their table more terrifying than the last. The men's business discussions switched seamlessly between English and Italian, with occasional words in what sounded like Russian, or possibly Ukrainian. When they finally departed, each nodding respectfully to Dario on their way out, Julia considered fleeing through the kitchen. The thought of her mother's medical bills quickly crushed that fantasy, forcing her to approach the table where he waited alone with dangerous patience. Dario gestured to the chair across from him, his expression unreadable in the dimmed restaurant lighting. "Sit," he commanded, filling a second glass with the remaining wine. "I have a proposition that might interest a woman of your particular talents that are clearly wasted in this establishment." Julia's small apartment greeted her with familiar shadows as she unlocked the door at 2 a.m., her mind still reeling from Dario's unexpected offer. The medicine bottles lined up on the kitchen counter reminded her why she couldn't simply ignore him, each one representing another impossible bill she struggled to pay. Her mother slept soundly in the bedroom they shared, the rhythmic wheeze of her breathing a constant reminder of the illness slowly consuming her. Each pill represented another shift Julia needed to work, another day of watching her mother fade while specialists shook their heads and mentioned treatments they couldn't afford. She slipped off her shoes and collapsed onto their worn couch, pulling Dario's business card from her pocket. The embossed letters caught the moonlight streaming through their thin curtains, making his name seem to glow with ominous significance that both frightened and oddly fascinated her. 3 days to decide, he had said, his eyes never leaving hers as he outlined what he wanted. A translator who could move invisibly through social circles, catching conversations not meant for American ears. Someone who appeared harmless but understood everything, reporting directly to him during international negotiations. Julia traced her finger over his phone number, considering the implications of his offer. The salary he mentioned would cover her mother's treatment entirely, with enough left over to move them somewhere better than this crumbling building with its constant noise and unreliable heating that worsened her mother's condition. Her language skills had always been her secret weapon, a gift from the grandmother who raised her while her mother worked 3 jobs. Italian had been their private language, a way to preserve their heritage when everything else had been lost, alongside French and passable Spanish she'd mastered through university courses before dropping out. When morning came, Julia prepared her mother's breakfast with mechanical precision, hiding her exhaustion behind a practiced smile. "You look worried, sweetheart," her mother observed, reaching for her hand despite the effort it cost her. "Did something happen at work that's troubling you?" "Just tired," Julia lied, squeezing her mother's fingers gently. "The restaurant was busy last night, that's all." She couldn't bring herself to mention Dario, or how his dark eyes had followed her every movement after the others left, assessing her value like a rare acquisition. The hospital called midway through breakfast, the specialist's secretary politely reminding them about the outstanding balance. Julia assured the woman they would pay soon, the practiced lie bitter on her tongue as she watched her mother pretend not to hear the conversation about money. Her phone chimed with a text from an unknown number, just as she finished washing the dishes. "My driver will collect you at noon for lunch," it read. Not a request, but a command. "We have matters to discuss that shouldn't wait for your decision deadline." The sleek black car appeared precisely at noon, its tinted windows concealing whoever waited inside. Julia hesitated on the sidewalk, knowing that entering meant crossing a boundary she could never uncross, yet seeing no alternative that wouldn't end with her mother suffering. The driver opened the door to reveal Dario sitting alone in the back seat, his casual elegance somehow more intimidating than the formal attire from the previous night. "I hoped you'd come," he said simply, gesturing to the empty seat beside him. "We have much to discuss about your future." The restaurant he took her to bore no resemblance to her workplace, with private dining rooms and staff who never made eye contact. Julia fidgeted with her simple dress, acutely aware of how out of place she appeared in this world of casual luxury and whispered conversations. "Your circumstances," Dario began after ordering for them both without consultation, "are not unknown to me. Your mother's condition requires specialized treatments your current employment cannot possibly cover, regardless of how many double shifts you work. I'm not asking you to become involved in anything illegal," Dario clarified, his fingers drumming rhythmically against the pristine tablecloth. "Your role would be strictly legitimate, accompanying me to business meetings, social gatherings, listening carefully to what others say when they believe no Americans understand their language." Julia's heart hammered against her ribs as she processed his words. "You want me to spy for you," she stated flatly, keeping her voice low despite the privacy of their alcove. "To pretend I don't understand while people reveal things they wouldn't say if they knew I comprehended every word." Dario's smile didn't reach his eyes as he leaned forward. "Not spy. That suggests something underhanded. Think of yourself as an information specialist, providing me with business intelligence that gives my family's enterprises a competitive advantage in negotiations across multiple industries." "And if I refuse?" Julia asked, already knowing the answer from the calculated way he studied her face, measuring her desperation against her principles. "What happens if I walk away right now and pretend this conversation never happened between us?" He sipped his wine slowly before answering, the deliberate pause a psychological tactic she recognized from her psychology courses. "Then you return to your life, your mounting bills, and watch your mother deteriorate, because you cannot afford the experimental treatment that might save her life." The food arrived, exquisitely presented but tasting like ash in Julia's mouth as she considered her options. "The specialists at Northwestern Memorial have a new protocol," Dario continued conversationally. "Expensive, not covered by insurance, but showing remarkable results in cases like your mother's." "How do you know about her condition?" Julia demanded, her fork clattering against the plate. "Have you been watching me before last night? Did you plan this entire scenario after learning about my situation and language abilities through some perverted background check?" Instead of anger, his expression showed something close to admiration at her direct question. "Efficiency isn't perversion, Julia. When I identify a potential asset, I learn everything relevant about them. Your mother's illness makes you reliable. People with nothing to lose are unpredictable, while those with everything to lose are controllable." His casual cruelty struck her like a physical blow, the calculated manipulation laid bare without pretense. You'd use my mother's suffering as leverage to ensure my loyalty? What kind of monster thinks that way about another person's pain and vulnerability? The kind who can ensure she receives treatment unavailable to ordinary citizens, Dario replied without hesitation, sliding a folder across the table. This contains the details of her current condition, the experimental protocol, and the specialists willing to see her immediately upon my recommendation. Julia's hands shook as she opened the folder, scanning medical terminology that matched exactly what her mother's doctors had described as the ideal but impossible treatment option. This doesn't make sense. Why me? You could hire professional translators, people with credentials and experience. Professionals are noticed, Dario explained, watching her closely. You have a natural gift for languages and an unremarkable appearance that allows you to blend into backgrounds. People underestimate you, which makes you perfect for what I need. Someone who can move through rooms unnoticed while catching everything. His assessment stung despite its accuracy, reminding Julia of how often she'd been overlooked throughout her life. You want an answer now, don't you? This lunch isn't about giving me time to consider your offer. It's about forcing an immediate decision while showing me exactly what's at stake. 3 days was a courtesy I'm withdrawing, Dario confirmed, checking his watch with deliberate casualness. My schedule has accelerated unexpectedly. There's a gathering tonight where your skills would prove immediately valuable. You begin this evening, or the opportunity disappears permanently. The reality of her situation crashed down around Julia, her mother growing weaker daily, the unpaid medical bills, the looming eviction notice she'd hidden in her dresser drawer. If I agree, what guarantees do I have that you'll actually help my mother, instead of just using her condition to control me indefinitely? Dario's expression hardened slightly at the implied accusation. I've arranged for her transfer to Northwestern tomorrow morning regardless of your decision. Consider it a gesture of good faith, though continued treatment will depend entirely on our arrangement remaining satisfactory to both parties. The mansion on Lakeshore Drive loomed before them like a fortress, its windows glowing warmly against the Chicago night. Julia smoothed down the black cocktail dress Dario had sent to her apartment, the silk fabric more expensive than anything she'd ever owned. Remember, Dario murmured as they approached the entrance. You're my new cultural attaché, assisting with international relations for our import business. Stay close, speak only when addressed directly, and pretend your Italian is limited to basic phrases while catching everything. The security guards nodded deferentially as they passed, their eyes lingering on Julia with undisguised curiosity. The weight of their stares made her spine stiffen, acutely aware that in this world, newcomers were potential threats until proven otherwise. Inside, the opulence took her breath away, crystal chandeliers, priceless artwork, and Chicago's elite mingling over champagne that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Julia forced herself to breathe normally, channeling her grandmother's lessons about appearing confident in any situation. Dario, finally! A silver-haired man approached, embracing him warmly before turning appraising eyes toward Julia. And who is this lovely addition to your normally dour entourage? You've been keeping secrets from your old friends, it seems. Paolo Mancini, meet Julia Reeves, Dario introduced smoothly, his hand settling possessively at the small of her back. She's helping streamline our international communications, a recent but valuable addition to our organization. Paolo switched to rapid Italian, clearly assuming she wouldn't understand his suggestive comments about Dario's true interests in her qualifications. Julia maintained a pleasant, slightly confused smile while absorbing every word, noting the way Dario's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She's quite beautiful for an American, Paolo continued in Italian, circling Julia like a predator, though perhaps too innocent-looking for your usual tastes. Does she know what kind of man she's working for now, I wonder? Dario responded with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes, steering Julia away with practiced ease. Ignore him, he whispered in English. Paolo enjoys making newcomers uncomfortable. It's a test of sorts to gauge your reactions under pressure. Throughout the evening, Julia was introduced to countless associates, each assessing her through calculating gazes. She caught fragments of conversations in Italian, Russian, and French, snippets about shipment dates, customs officials, and territorial disputes happening across the city. The Albanians are getting bolder, one man commented in Italian while passing Julia, not bothering to lower his voice. 3 of our delivery drivers intercepted last week, and that new detective asking too many questions about the waterfront property. Julia dutifully reported each conversation to Dario during their brief moments alone, watching his expression darken with certain details she relayed. "You're more valuable than I anticipated," he admitted, after hearing about the Albanian situation. "Now stay by the bar and listen to the man in the blue tie." The evening stretched into midnight, Julia's feet aching in the unfamiliar heels as she maintained her charade of ignorance. She was mentally cataloging every name, connection, and business interest mentioned when she noticed a woman watching her with unusual intensity from across the room. The stranger approached with deliberate grace, her accent pure Milanese as she introduced herself in English. "I'm Helena Vieri," she said, studying Julia's face carefully. "You've caused quite a stir tonight. Dario rarely brings new people into these gatherings, especially women who aren't family." "I'm just helping with some translation work," Julia replied cautiously, sensing a test beneath the seemingly casual conversation. "My Italian isn't very professional, but I'm learning quickly to assist with basic communications." 3 weeks into her new role, Julia found herself in Dario's downtown office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city she'd lived in, but never seen from such heights. Her mother's treatment was progressing well, her color improving daily under the care of specialists who never mentioned payment. "The shipping manifests don't match what the Russians are claiming," Julia explained, spreading documents across Dario's desk. "When they switched to Ukrainian, assuming no one would understand, they mentioned additional cargo being added after the official inspection, but before crossing international waters." Dario studied her with that unreadable expression she'd come to recognize as his thinking face, somewhere between calculation and curiosity. "You've prevented a potential $5 million problem with that information," he said finally, closing the distance between them with measured steps. "I'm just doing what you hired me for," Julia replied, suddenly aware of how alone they were in the sprawling office suite. The evening skyline cast them both in golden light, softening his usually hard features into something almost approachable. "You've exceeded every expectation," Dario countered, his voice lower than usual. "In fact, I've been thinking your talents are wasted on mere translation work. You have an analytical mind that spots connections others miss, and instincts that can't be taught." Heat crept up Julia's neck at the unexpected praise, confusion swirling through her as she tried to reconcile this version of Dario with the calculating man who'd essentially blackmailed her into working for him. "What exactly are you suggesting? That my role should change?" "I'm suggesting dinner, for starters," he replied with unexpected humor, checking his watch. "Somewhere we won't be interrupted by business associates or rival families trying to determine your importance in my organization's hierarchy." The restaurant was small and inconspicuous, nothing like the ostentatious venues where business was typically conducted. Julia watched Dario dismiss his security detail with a casual wave, leaving them truly alone for the first time since their arrangement began. "Why did you really hire me?" she asked directly once they were seated, the question that had burned in her mind for weeks. "There must be dozens of bilingual people you could have chosen who already had connections to your world." Dario considered her question, swirling red wine thoughtfully before answering. "The moment you corrected Giuseppe's Italian without fear despite being surrounded by dangerous men, I saw something rare. Authenticity that couldn't be fabricated, and intelligence that couldn't be intimidated." "You risked bringing an outsider into your inner circle because I corrected someone's grammar?" Julia asked incredulously, unsure whether to be flattered or concerned by his explanation. "That seems like an enormous security risk based on a momentary impression." "I've built my reputation on reading people correctly," Dario replied, his usual guardedness slipping to reveal something more genuine. "When you understand what drives someone, what they fear, what they love, what they're willing to sacrifice, you can predict their actions with remarkable accuracy." As the evening progressed, conversation shifted from business to personal histories, Dario revealing fragments of his childhood in Naples before his family relocated to America. Julia found herself laughing at his dry observations about Chicago politics, momentarily forgetting the circumstances that had brought them together. "My father would have appreciated your directness," Dario commented as they shared dessert, an unexpected vulnerability crossing his features. "He believed surrounding yourself with yes-men was the fastest path to failure. He died last year, heart attack during a family dinner." The conversation continued in Dario's car as they drove along Lake Michigan, the city lights reflecting off the water like scattered stars. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of my life before," Julia admitted, watching the waves lap against the shore. "But I can't deny that the work is fascinating. And here I thought you were only staying for your mother's treatment," Dario replied, studying her profile in the darkness. Is it possible you've developed a taste for this world despite its complications and dangers that follow you everywhere? The hospital corridor gleamed under fluorescent lights as Julia made her daily visit, balancing a bouquet of fresh flowers and the novel her mother had requested. 2 of Dario's men nodded respectfully as she passed, their presence now a familiar sight outside her mother's private room. "The doctor says I might be able to go home next week," her mother announced excitedly as Julia arranged the flowers. "He called it a remarkable response to treatment. Said he rarely sees such dramatic improvement in cases like mine that were previously considered untreatable." Julia smiled, genuine happiness mixing with complicated guilt about the circumstances that had made this recovery possible. "That's wonderful news, Mom. I've already started looking at ground floor apartments to make things easier for you during the transition back to normal life." "This mysterious job of yours must pay extremely well," her mother observed, sharp eyes missing nothing despite her illness. "Private hospital rooms, specialist consultations, experimental treatments, not to mention your new wardrobe and that expensive perfume you're wearing. And does this company have a name? Or perhaps just a handsome boss who looks at you the way your father once looked at me?" her mother asked with surprising perception. "You mention him in every conversation, whether you realize it or not." The observation caught Julia off guard, heat rushing to her cheeks as she busied herself with adjusting the blinds. "Dario is just my employer, Mom. Our relationship is strictly professional despite the unusual circumstances that brought us together. I may be sick, but I'm not blind," her mother replied gently. "I've seen how you light up when you talk about him, and I've noticed the way his men protect this room like I'm royalty instead of a retired seamstress with mounting medical bills." The hint of a knowing smile crossed her mother's face as she adjusted her blankets. "Your grandmother always said your gift for languages would lead you somewhere extraordinary, though I doubt even she imagined this particular path." Her voice dropped to a whisper, eyes darting to the door. "These men outside, they carry weapons, don't they? I've noticed the bulges beneath their expensive jackets when they shift positions." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door, Julia's heart skipping as Dario himself entered carrying a small gift bag. "Mrs. Reeves, I hope I'm not intruding. I was in the building for a board meeting and wanted to check on your progress personally." "You didn't need to come here," Julia said when they finally stepped into the hallway, confusion evident in her voice. "Your men report to you daily about her condition, and the doctors send detailed updates to your office every morning after their rounds." Dario's expression softened unexpectedly. "My mother died when I was 12. Cancer that progressed too quickly for treatment. I understand the weight of watching someone you love suffer while feeling powerless to help them fight an invisible enemy." The vulnerability in his admission stunned Julia into silence, forcing her to reconsider her assumptions about his motivations. "I'm sorry about your mother," she finally managed, seeing genuine pain in his eyes for the first time since they'd met. "The experimental treatment your mother is receiving was originally developed for mine," Dario continued quietly, looking through the window at Mrs. Reeves reading her novel. "It came too late for her, but seeing it help others brings a certain closure to that chapter." The soft glow of computer monitors illuminated Julia's face as she worked late in Dario's downtown office, translating documents for an upcoming meeting with Slovenian investors. 3 months into her role, she now had her own workspace adjacent to his, complete with security clearance and a small staff reporting to her. A notification from the building's security system caught her attention. Helena Vieri had entered the lobby and was requesting access to the executive floor. Julia frowned, recalling that Helena had mentioned traveling to Miami for the week during their last conversation at a charity gala. "Let her up," Julia instructed security after a moment's hesitation, curiosity overriding caution. Helena had become something of a mentor during her transition into Dario's world, offering guidance on navigating the complex social hierarchies and unspoken rules of their circle. When the elevator doors opened, Helena appeared disheveled, her normally impeccable appearance marred by wind-blown hair and smudged makeup. "Thank God you're here," she gasped, clutching Julia's arm with trembling fingers. "I need to see Dario immediately. There's been a breach. He's across town at the warehouse inspection," Julia replied, concern mounting at Helena's unusual state. "What's happened? Should I call him back here? Or arrange for you to be taken to him directly with a security escort?" Instead of answering, Helena pushed past her toward Dario's office, heading straight for his computer with purposeful strides. "The information can't wait. I need to access his secure server now before they realize I've discovered their plan to undermine the entire East Side operation." Something in Helena's urgency felt performative, triggering warning bells in Julia's mind as she watched the woman attempt to bypass Dario's security protocols. "Stop," Julia commanded firmly, moving to block her access. "Whatever information you have can be relayed by phone or delivered in person." Helena's expression transformed instantly from desperate to calculating, her previous panic vanishing like a mask being removed. "You're more perceptive than I anticipated," she remarked coldly, reaching into her purse with deliberate slowness. "Most people would have been eager to help in a crisis. Most people haven't spent months learning to read micro-expressions during high-stakes negotiations," Julia countered, subtly pressing the silent alarm button beneath her desk. "Who sent you, Helena? Which family are you actually working for while pretending loyalty to Dario?" Helena's perfectly manicured fingers stilled over the keyboard, her calculating gaze shifting between the computer and Julia's unwavering stance. "You're not just a translator anymore, are you?" she observed with clinical detachment, abandoning her desperate act entirely. "He's grooming you for something bigger? The council meetings, the private strategy sessions, the personal security detail. He's never given anyone access so quickly." The elevator chimed again before Helena could answer, Dario himself stepping into the office with 2 security guards flanking him closely. His expression remained impassive as he surveyed the scene, but Julia recognized the dangerous calm that preceded his most calculated decisions. "Julia called in a security concern," he stated rather than asked, his eyes never leaving Helena's face. Apparently her instincts were correct, as they so often are these days. "Care to explain why you're trying to access my private servers while claiming an emergency that doesn't exist?" Helena's composure cracked momentarily, her gaze darting between potential escape routes as she realized her position. "The Albanians made a better offer," she admitted finally, chin lifting in defiance. "Your father would have anticipated this move months ago. You've grown soft and trusting since taking control." "My father would have killed you where you stand," Dario replied conversationally, adjusting his cufflinks as though discussing dinner plans. "I, however, believe in extracting value from every situation. Even betrayal has its uses when handled properly by those who understand patience." "How did you know to come back?" Julia asked once they were alone, still processing how narrowly they'd avoided a potentially catastrophic security breach. "I only triggered the silent alarm minutes ago. Not enough time for you to return from the warehouse district." The implication hung between them, unspoken but clear. She had passed a test she hadn't known she was taking. "I wouldn't betray you," Julia stated simply, surprising herself with the fierce certainty behind her words. "Not after everything you've done for my mother. For me." The warehouse by the lakefront stood silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky, waves crashing rhythmically against the shore as Julia followed Dario through the maze of shipping containers. 2 weeks after Helena's betrayal, tensions with the Albanian syndicate had escalated dramatically, culminating in this unusual early morning meeting. "They specifically requested your presence," Dario explained, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "After Helena revealed your role in our organization, they've become fixated on meeting the American woman who speaks 5 languages and has the ear of Chicago's most influential family." Julia's stomach tightened with apprehension as they approached a makeshift negotiating area, a table surrounded by chairs in a cleared space between towering metal containers. "What exactly do they want from me? I'm not authorized to negotiate terms or make concessions on behalf of your family. They want to assess whether Helena's claims about your influence are true," Dario replied, checking his watch impatiently. "More importantly, they want to determine if you're a weakness they can exploit in future dealings, a pressure point to use against me during negotiations." The weight of Dario's custom-made pistol pressed against the small of Julia's back, concealed perfectly by her tailored blazer, his insistence that she carry it after Helena's betrayal suddenly making perfect sense. "They'll test your composure through intimidation," he added, voice dropping to ensure only she could hear. "Remember that, in their culture, showing fear is an unforgivable weakness, especially from a woman standing among men who've built empires on others' terror." "The famous linguist finally stands before me," Enver remarked in Albanian, his eyes coldly assessing Julia while addressing Dario. "She's prettier than Helena described. No wonder you keep her so close despite the security risk an outsider represents to your operations. Mr. Cortese speaks highly of your business acumen," she responded in perfect English, playing her role while watching confusion flicker across Enver's face. "I'm merely here to facilitate communication, should any language barriers arise during your important discussions." Enver switched to Italian, then Russian, making increasingly offensive remarks about her presumed relationship with Dario, while watching for any reaction that would betray her understanding. Julia maintained her pleasant, slightly bored expression, periodically checking her phone as though completely oblivious. "Enough games," Dario interrupted finally, his tone deceptively casual despite the tension vibrating through the air. "We're here to discuss territory boundaries and import schedules, not to indulge your curiosity about my staff. Shall we proceed with actual business?" The negotiations proceeded tensely for nearly 2 hours, Julia catching every insult and hidden threat embedded within seemingly reasonable proposals from the Albanian side. When Enver's lieutenant suggested a private sidebar discussion in Serbian, assuming no one would understand, she made her move. "Perhaps you should reconsider discussing assassination plans in front of the target," Julia suggested in flawless Serbian, watching shock register on the men's faces, especially when the warehouse security cameras are recording every word for evidence purposes. The atmosphere transformed instantly, hands moving toward concealed weapons as Dario's security team stepped forward from the shadows. "You understand our language perfectly," Enver stated, anger and grudging respect warring in his expression. "Helena was right about your capabilities, if not your loyalty." "Helena underestimated many things," Dario commented mildly, his relaxed posture belying the dangerous edge in his voice, "including Julia's commitment to our organization and my willingness to anticipate betrayal from all directions, including this meeting that you believed was secret. My loyalty isn't for sale," Julia stated firmly, meeting Enver's gaze directly for the first time. "And threatening my family is the fastest way to ensure I'll personally ensure every word you've spoken reaches the appropriate authorities, complete with audio evidence from the recording device in my bracelet." The standoff stretched for several breathless seconds before Enver nodded almost imperceptibly, a new respect evident in his assessment. "I withdraw my previous suggestions," he conceded, switching back to English. "Perhaps we can return to legitimate business matters that benefit both our organizations." Sunset painted Chicago's skyline in brilliant oranges and pinks as Julia stood on the balcony of her new apartment, the lake stretching before her like a second sky. 6 months had transformed her life completely, from struggling waitress to essential advisor in Dario's expanding empire of legitimate businesses. Her mother thrived in the adjacent apartment, her health stabilized by the experimental treatment that had succeeded where conventional medicine failed. The connecting door between their spaces gave both women the independence and proximity they needed during this transition to their new reality. "Admiring the view again?" Dario asked, joining her with 2 glasses of champagne. "Though I suppose it hasn't lost its appeal, after all these months of calling this place home, instead of that crumbling building where I first found you." Julia accepted the glass, their fingers brushing briefly in a contact that no longer felt accidental. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed since that night at the restaurant, when I corrected Giuseppe's Italian and nearly got myself killed for linguistic perfectionism. One of my better investments," Dario remarked with the hint of a smile that had become more frequent in recent weeks. "Though Helena and the Albanians might disagree, considering how thoroughly you've helped dismantle their operations through strategic interpretation during negotiations." The mention of Helena still stung slightly, the betrayal a harsh lesson in the realities of the world she now inhabited. "Have you heard anything about where she went after the authorities finished questioning her about the Albanian connection? She seems to have disappeared completely. Some questions are better left unanswered," Dario replied enigmatically, his expression revealing nothing as he surveyed his city below. "Let's just say Helena found retirement preferable to the alternatives that presented themselves after her true allegiances became clear to all involved parties." Julia understood the implication, but chose not to press further, having learned when to seek information and when to accept strategic ambiguity in her new role. "The legal team finished restructuring the import division this morning. We're now fully compliant with all federal regulations." "My father would have considered such legitimacy a weakness," Dario observed, his tone contemplative rather than critical. He believed operating in shadows was the only path to true power, that compliance meant surrendering advantage to competitors willing to cross lines we refused to cross. Julia studied his profile, noting the tension that always appeared when he mentioned his father. "And what do you believe? After 6 months of transitioning questionable operations into legitimate enterprises, do you see it as weakness or strategic evolution for the family's legacy?" "I believe in adaptation," Dario answered after a thoughtful pause. "The old ways served their purpose during different times, but true longevity requires building something that can withstand scrutiny, empire built on foundations that won't crumble when examined closely by authorities." The comfortable silence between them spoke of a partnership that had evolved beyond employer and employee, beyond even the complicated debt of her mother's treatment. Something deeper had taken root during late nights strategizing, shared meals, and mutual protection against common enemies. The Milano investors arrive tomorrow, Julia reminded him, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the skyline. They're expecting a full presentation on the restaurant chain expansion, including site locations and projected revenue models for the first 5 years. Dario turned to face her fully, his expression unusually serious even for him. Before they arrive, there's something we need to discuss. A change in your position within the organization that better reflects your contributions and the trust you've earned through repeated loyalty. Julia's heart quickened at his tone, uncertain whether to expect promotion or dismissal after successfully completing the transition to legitimate operations. "I'm listening," she replied carefully, maintaining the professional composure that had become second nature. "You've moved beyond translator or advisor," Dario continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "The family council met yesterday and unanimously agreed that you should be offered partnership status, equal decision-making authority, profit sharing, and permanent protection regardless of your answer." The offer stunned her into momentary silence, its implications cascading through her mind. "Partnership means there's no walking away," she finally managed, understanding exactly what was being offered. "It means I'm choosing this life permanently, with all its complications and consequences. It means choosing us permanently," Dario corrected softly, the distinction subtle but significant as he closed the distance between them. "The professional aspects are merely formalities documenting what we both already know. You belong here, with the family, with me." The kiss that followed felt inevitable, months of tension resolving in a single moment of clarity as Chicago's lights blinked on beneath them. Julia's new reality crystallized in that embrace, not a victim of circumstance or reluctant employee, but a woman who had found unexpected strength in dangerous waters. "I should warn you," she murmured when they finally separated, a smile playing at her lips. "Accepting a partner who corrects your Italian might lead to linguistic debates during business negotiations when you least expect them." Dario laughed, the sound still rare enough to feel like a victory. "I'm counting on it," he replied, pulling her close as night fell completely over the city that had transformed from her prison to her kingdom. Some corrections change everything for the better, even when they seem dangerous in the moment. Thank you all for following this story. If you're enjoying it, write in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video, as your support is important for me to continue creating content here.